A woman wrote she was virtually gang raped in Facebook's metaverse. When I first read these headlines, my reaction was one of incredulity. It sounded like a joke or a spoof, or one of those news stories that you would read in a now defunct British tabloid. Online, there were high-profile sites that salaciously repeated the claims to illustrate that internet is bad, and there were YouTubers who were more skeptical and critical.
So you're saying that you were raped by a virtual character? Something that doesn't exist, in a plaza that also doesn't exist? This is like the exact same thing as me saying, bro, I was murdered in Call of Duty, call the police.
As I began to think about it and the implications, I started considering how virtual worlds can emotionally draw us in and actually feel real. I will be discussing my experiences of the feelings of reality and assault in VR games and VR worlds, and examining how this pertains to how sexual assault in a VR metaverse can feel real. Neena Jane Patel is the co-founder of Kabuni, a metaverse company for children which she started with her husband Nimesh Patel. They market it as the world's safest metaverse for kids. She's the Vice President of Research and is engaged in a PhD study for Reading University on how extended reality can affect the body and mind. It's Patel who reported the abuse she suffered at the end of 2021. This is exactly what she said in a Medium article.
I was verbally and sexually harassed. 3 to 4 male avatars with male voices, essentially but virtually gang raped my avatar and took photos. As I tried to get away, they yelled, "Don't pretend you didn't love it, Anne. Go rub yourself off to the photo." A horrible experience that happened so fast, and before I could even think about putting the safety barrier in place, I froze. It was surreal. It was a nightmare.
Now there's two aspects I'd like to discuss about Neena's experience, and they pertain to the actual abuse and then also the terminology she used, the language. Starting with the language, she used the term gang rape. I don't think this is a good choice of words. I think it's a very bad choice of words. It is distasteful to compare rape that happens in the real world to what happens in this virtual online space. In the past, I've spoken to rape survivors, and I'm sure they would not equate the two. Even if you were to translate those in VR actions to real-world physical actions, it would not be, in the British legal system at least, classified as rape. In no way is this to say that Patel didn't experience abuse, but it's rather to say that with real rape in the physical world, this is an attack on a person, on their body, their freedom. There's also the added element that the person is frightened for their life, because in many previous instances there are people who are raped and then killed. That fear of being murdered will not be present when controlling an avatar. So to compare what happens with real world rape with what happens in this virtual space, that's a comparison that's on the sensational side, a little bit on the tabloidy side. But the media certainly responded to it.
Do you know what happened next? Her avatar was raped.
Some have been irresponsible for directly reporting the story as actual rape without analysing it or clearly defining the differences to their viewers. Some Indian news platforms even embellish the story, saying that the avatar had been stripped naked, although I do wonder if this was a translation issue.
वर्चुअली उसके अवतार के साथ सामूहिक बलात्कार किया, कपड़े उतारे और मेटावर्स में उसके साथ दुर्व्यवहार किया.
Some also mocked Patel and the headlines.
As you tried to get away, lady, take off the headset. What are they gonna do? Follow you out?
No. Oh, that woman in the metaverse wouldn't stop touching me. Thank God I can just take off the headset. There you are. I followed you out.
It may be that Patel was using a kind of lingual skeuomorphism, using real-world terminology to explain to people who are not familiar with what's going on in a VR space, in a VR world. So if that's what Patel was doing, I kind of understand what she was trying to do. It's like the people who say Bitcoin isn't real just because it's a virtual currency and not a physical currency. It doesn't mean it's not real, it's just virtual. So I do think that with language, it's going to need to develop to convey the reality going on in these virtual spaces. Patel has explained her upset and the effect the experience has had on her. She said,
Virtual reality has essentially been designed so the mind and body can't differentiate virtual digital experiences from real. In some capacity, my LG physiological and psychological response was as though it happened in reality.
In other words, it felt real.
Just about to put on this Quest 2 virtual reality headset, which I have on loan.
Parmi Olsen is a reporter for Bloomberg, and she tried Facebook's Horizon Worlds for 2 weeks. She experienced being the only woman in some spaces, with men surrounding her and taking pictures. This is a feature of the world, but one which makes it easy for anybody to just take a picture of anything they see. In this instance, as in the case of Patel, it was being used to intimidate her. In 2016, Jordan Bellameur described her first experience in VR world Quiver. She said,
"It was my turn next. I glanced one last time around the room before strapping on the massive headset and into a world more beautiful than I could have imagined. Never had I experienced virtual reality that felt so real. I was smitten. I never wanted to leave this world.
Another player then groped her chest and crotch area. Her husband and brother-in-law, who were sitting next to her, watching a flat screen, they didn't understand how distressing it was for her. She said,
Remember that little digression I told you about how the 100-foot drop looked so convincing? Yeah, guess what? The virtual groping feels just as real. Of course you're not physically being touched, just like you're not actually 100 feet off the ground, but it's still scary as hell. What's worse is that it felt real, violating. The public virtual chasing and groping happened a full week ago and I'm still thinking about it.
So what she's explaining there is that the experience was distressing for her and it's still on her mind, as can be a real world assault. To attempt to have some understanding of whether assault in the VR metaverse can have an effect on people, I want to look back on my experiences playing computer and video games, because it's from computer games that these virtual worlds have derived from. Over the years, I've played many different types of computer games, from a rectangular block playing tennis, to a game with a racing blue hedgehog, to a young man on an adventure to become a pirate, all sorts of things. These have always been for entertainment. When playing a game, you use the controller to move a character to achieve an objective. This might just be to reach the end of the level, or to move through a story, but there's no real sense of peril. Space Invaders introduced the concept of multiple lives. You would have 3 lives, and once they expired, it was game over. You were dead. It was a digital game, so the level of upset you might experience would be similar to when losing a game of chess or Monopoly. And unless you are a particularly bad loser, that upset would be negligible. Of course, playing as a spaceship, it wouldn't really have a distressing effect on you if you did lose all your lives. But as games have developed, they have improved in graphics and with storytelling, so you can feel quite attached to your characters in a game. So you want to ensure that they are doing well, that they succeed. When they do die, if they are shot or killed, or they fall down, you may feel frustrated that you have to go back to the last load point and restart again. But there isn't any real sense of upset, because you don't actually believe a real person has died. It's just a character. It's just a game. And the frustration comes from having to repeat a certain part again. Nor do you feel fear for your character beyond the fear you might experience in a horror movie. I played the first Resident Evil on my friend's PlayStation 1 and it starts off quite serene, and then all of a sudden a Doberman smashed through a window and I jumped back, so there was the feeling of shock. It was like a thrill ride really, but because it was on a small flat screen, there wasn't any real fear beyond the jump scare. In online multiplayer combat games such as Halo, there is a victory move, colloquially referred to as teabagging. This is when a player kills his opponent. He or she might choose to walk up to their body and crouch up and down over their heads repeatedly. If you want to know more detail on what the action represents, there's an episode of Sex and the City that will explain things to you.
We have a teabag situation. Oh, I understand. Just breathe through your nose.
It's a move to taunt your fallen opponent, boasting of your success in defeating them, and it is predominantly male players, if that has any bearing on it. In the real world, such an incident would be considered sexual assault, of course, but in terms of playing a video game, an FPS game like this, it's just part of the vocabulary of multiplayer sportsmanship. If this happens to your character, it's not traumatic, it's not really happening to you, it just makes you eager for your character to respawn, so you can have your chance for revenge. Back in 2008, Sony launched PlayStation Home for the PS3. This was a progenitor to Facebook's Horizon World, a shared virtual space where people could create their own avatars in a semi-realistic style. You could go and mingle with other avatars and play casual games, but the main aspect of it was socialization. You couldn't vocally talk to others, but you could type public text messages. There was a word filter that would censor offensive words, which gave a degree of inbuilt safety. I didn't see anything that constituted assault or abuse at the time, but my experience was that I was a man playing with a male avatar, so I might not have had the same experience as a female player. In Horizon Worlds, users can use the VR controls to gesture almost anything, including inappropriately reaching out their arms to touch others. In PlayStation Home, there wasn't freedom to create any gestures that you wanted. Instead, there was a preset list that you could choose from, such as a wave or thumbs up, or even a negative thumbs down. And that's why walking around PlayStation Home, it was generally a friendly environment. It wasn't possible to engage in combat with other avatars, but if somebody was to hit your avatar, it wouldn't have felt traumatic, because like with a regular game, it is not you being attacked, it's your avatar, which is seen at a distance away from you on a TV screen. So this then raises the question, when playing a flat game, is it ever possible for the player to feel a real sense of danger? Whilst my first thought was that as the character is at a distance, how can you really feel a sense of peril? However, there are 2 flat games that have had a powerful effect on me like no games before them, and no games after them in fact. they disproved this hypothesis. Heavy Rain and Detroit Become Human are two games from a development studio, Quantic Dreams. Heavy Rain is about a boy who goes missing and the search to find him, and Detroit Become Human is set in the near future where there are androids who are treated as second-class citizens but begin to wake up and have a human consciousness and desire for free will. These two games are two utterly special titles. I've often wondered why they've had such a powerful, emotional effect on me like nothing else. I'm going to explain how. And a big part is to do with the mechanics. With many story-led games, you play as one character, and if your character dies, you can reload from a point before they died and continue with your adventure with nothing lost, so making a mistake is never fatal. Heavy Rain and Detroit Human do something different. There is not a reload feature. There is a cast of multiple characters that you're in control of, which switch as the narrative progresses. And it's very important that you control them well, because if one character dies, the game continues, but you lose that character. It might be that you grow attached to the character, it might be that you want to see what happens to them, and how they succeed, and so it's imperative that you do not let them die. As these are games with a strong narrative, you can be emotionally drawn into the story and attached to the characters. Then, knowing that there's not a reload function and that you're responsible for them because they can die, this changes the dynamic of the game into something a whole lot more serious. Suddenly I felt a very real sense of peril. Added to that is the aspect of controlling your character. Now the first thing is the controls when you play computer and video games. You normally use a joypad or a joystick, and the way you control your characters, it's very familiar. If you play one game, it's not going to be so different to control your character with another game of the same genre. You'll know what button to press to jump, to shoot, to move. It's all very familiar, and it's that familiarity that makes it second nature to control a new title you've never played before. What's so different about Heavy Rain and Detroit Become Human is that the creator of the game has intentionally subverted your ideas of what the controls should be. So rather than being preset buttons that perform the same action whenever you press them, what you do have is different buttons that are context sensitive in each new situation. What this means is the button functions can change depending on what part of the game you're in. So you have to be alert to follow the prompts when they appear briefly on screen. Not everybody is a fan of this method, but it's there to serve a purpose, which is to disorientate the player. So when the player is confronted in a situation and you don't know what to do, you have to find out what's the right button to press, and if you don't press the right button, then something terrible will happen. Potentially your character dying. The sudden pressure and urgency creates a real sense of panic. It's a very clever idea, especially as there are no second lives, there are no restarts, so you feel this extra sense of burden that you have to make sure you get it right. Let me give you an illustration from where I felt a real sense of peril in Heavy Rain. There's one point where I'm in control of a woman in an apartment, and there's an intruder who's broken in. I felt a sense of danger. I wanted to keep her out of danger. There was the threat of violence and possibly a sexual attack. It wasn't that she was just a character on a screen. I was her to some degree. And it's a very strange experience to feel that closeness to a character. And again with Detroit Become Human, there are two characters, a female android and a male android. And again both of them get into situations similar to that, where I didn't really want them to become harmed. What Quantic Dream has done with these games is something that I don't think any other game I've played has been able to achieve, for me at least. They demonstrate that with the right creativity, a player can feel a real emotional attachment to an in-game character, almost becoming the character. And through creative gameplay mechanics, this can induce the player to feel risk, danger, and peril, so that an in-game experience is traumatic. Let's talk about the effect of VR and what it can do for you now. I don't know if you've actually had the opportunity to try virtual reality, but it really is quite amazing. With traditional computer games, they are played on a flat screen that's at a distance from you. With VR, because you're seeing it through the headset around your eyes, it's intended to be perceived as real, and it does this by using two different types of effect. The first is giving you a sense of presence, and the second a sense of embodiment. So let's take a closer look at what these mean. Take for example a game that I played, which is The Elder Scrolls Skyrim. It's a fantasy game in a fantasy world, and in the game I've created a character. I'll go walk around, visit various taverns, kill various enemies. On a flat screen it looks like a regular game, because it looks fine. But there's a big difference when you play the VR version. It immerses you in the world, so rather than you just seeing characters at a distance on a screen, at the central part of your vision, instead you are actually feeling that you're there in the world. So what in the flat version was just a cave on a screen, now whilst playing it in VR, I can look around, I can look up and down and get a sense of depth and distance of the rocks and how high they go and how far an object is from me and the sense of sound around me. So it makes you feel that you're actually there, you're actually standing there. Or you turn your head to look behind you and you can see the area there, or look up and see the moons. That is the sense of presence. That's what VR is all about, making you feel you're somewhere else. Along with that comes the sense of embodiment, the feeling that your virtual body is your body on a psychological level. This can be done by a variety of different techniques. With the Batman Arkham VR game, you can be holding the controllers out in front of you and moving them around you, and you can see Batman's gloves. So it gives you a sense that the virtual body is your body on a psychological level. So, if a character was to throw something at your character, you would try and physically dodge, duck left or right, because it feels like it's coming towards you, similar to the old 3D effects in a 3D movie. The compounded effect of all this is that if a character in a VR game is going to throw a brick at your head, you will feel just as anxious as if somebody in the real world was aiming a brick at you, because on a psychological level, the virtual begins to feel real, and the virtual body then begins to feel real. That's embodiment. As I said before, I've played many flat games, and if a monster comes and attacks me and kills my character, there's no fear. It's just frustration that my character has died and I have to restart. But let me tell you about this VR game I played. It's a fantasy game called Golem on PSVR, and it was quite an interesting experience, to be honest. So in this game Golem, my character had been shrunken, and I was exploring a cavern deep underneath the home, and in that cavern are these various bugs, but because my character had been shrunk, these bugs looked ginormous, the size of dogs, walking around like a giant ant army. Seeing them at a distance, I was trying to avoid them. They spotted me and they started walking towards me, and they started coming at speed and crawling up me. It was a horrific experience, and the game didn't let me walk away from them. And because I could hear them and the noise they were making like some sort of rats, it was actually quite claustrophobic, a suffocating experience, because it felt like there was nothing I could do. They were on me. I couldn't push them off. I ended up hearing myself screaming out. No, go away, go away. Looking back, it was quite wonderful that a game had this kind of effect on me, although it really wasn't wonderful at the time, because it had made me scream in a way that I don't think I've screamed in my whole life. It was a real sense of fear that the creatures were coming up to me, that I was being eaten by these creatures, and it was that sense of embodiment. So by feeling that I had a body, by feeling or seeing these creatures coming up to me, it felt my body had been attacked. So that is the power of embodiment, and that is the core and the power of VR. Because of this sense of embodiment, your virtual body being attacked, you might psychologically feel that it's your actual body, where there is a story and it's very powerful. Where you add that to the sense of embodiment and the fear to your personal self in VR, then that's a wonderful, distressing psychological recipe to make you feel immersed in the world, but also very frightened. In virtual worlds, people can create avatars that are fantastical, like a dancing bear or a flying dragon. But often people, and some metaverses, encourage that you make an avatar that is you, but a digital representation of you. It will feel more personal, but perhaps this can be psychologically dangerous, because if it is attacked in a VR world, then the user will feel it's a personal assault on themselves. Hello! There are multiple methods you could experience assault in a VR metaverse. I've tried to kind of categorize them. These are my initial thoughts. Firstly, there is verbal assault. This is where you are being called names, you're being insulted, perhaps racist names or any other type of derogatory words that pertain to you as an individual, or perhaps from being in a marginalized group, or that threaten sexual assault or violence. The US has freedom of speech, but in the UK, we have the crime of malicious communication, so words said in a VR world could lead to arrest and even imprisonment. There's also lack of control. You may feel that you're not fully in control of your avatar, so that gives you a feeling of powerlessness, and you're more likely to feel assaulted if it comes your way from another avatar. This might induce claustrophobia, being stuck in a situation, surrounded, and not knowing how to remove yourself from it. This happened to Nina Patel when she described being surrounded and not being able to exit to a safety zone. There's the added aspect of intimidation, where your avatar is surrounded by other avatars. They may all be signaling a rude signal to you, a sexual signal, a racist signal, so you can feel intimidated. In the UK, in the real world, this would be grounds for an assault charge at least, and it may be that as Web3 develops, the UK government may look to police VR spaces. And lastly, there is touch. This is enabled through bodysuits. As this is the early days of VR, it's not a standard feature, but will grow in popularity as VR does. Bodysuits allow you to feel senses in your arms, your legs, your body, and whilst the online platforms will definitely have safety systems in place so that nobody can touch you against your will, but in the same way people are able to hack online games like Call of Duty, there will be people who attempt to hack these systems so that you will feel touch against your will. Digesting everything we've looked at, yes, people can feel assaulted in VR that make the experience uncomfortable and also make it feel real in a way that is different from a computer game. So what can we learn? As we as a society step into the metaverse, it's going to be an exciting, wonderful frontier. But there must also be measures, safety measures to protect people, and this is going to be a learning experience. The people in charge of the platforms have to protect the mental well-being of their users, whilst ensuring they do not restrict lawful freedom of expression. We are now learning that things, events, actions that take place in virtual worlds can feel and are real.